Welcome to Module 6 in the Step 7 Odyssey project. In this module we're going to test our AutoCycle functionality, do a little more work with the simulator and the symbol table. Hope you enjoy it. This is where we left off with our auto manual functionality. I did make some changes here. One of the things that I did is I went into the symbol table and put spaces in all of the symbols. So you can see here there are no run-ons like there were last time. So our words end at a certain point, then have a space, and they all line up properly. Another thing that I did is I did put these little titles on every network. And one of the reasons that this is a good idea is if you go down here to this tab, you can actually see the titles of the network. So you can see where auto mode, manual mode, AutoCycle, things like that were. And if you double click on them, you will go to that rung. So this is kind of like a table of contents. So that's kind of convenient. These three tabs down here, of course, have the instructions in them. They have the network structure, the calls, and then they have this little table of contents here. So the other thing we're going to do here is I'm going to create some vertical bits. Vertical bits are very convenient in the simulator. So vertical bits are handy because they show the actual names of the symbols. You can see that there's room here. So if I type in MB2, I get all of the symbol names lined up alongside the boxes. So if I want to create something, I simply put a toggle in there. Of course, a lot of these things, if I toggle the auto push button, then it is going to set the auto mode. So I'm also going to put vertical bits for the M100 register. This only does a byte at a time. Oh, that is not a vertical bit. Let's put a vertical bit in there. And MB100, and you can see my auto and manual push button. I'm in manual mode here. If I push my auto push button, I go into auto. If I push my manual push button, I go into manual. I can also monitor, provided my project is saved properly. We'll save it and monitor it. So some of the logic that we put in here, remember, if we're in auto mode, which right now I am not, then if I push the AutoCycle start push button, which is this input up here, then I will run a timer for 3 seconds and latch AutoCycle mode, provided I have a cycle start permissive. So let's put it in auto mode. You can see here we're in auto mode. Now I'm going to toggle this cycle start permissive, but this would have been things like maybe I have error on the machine, the e-stop's not pressed, things like that. So we'll come back and do some logic for this later. But right now it's something that's pretty easy to just toggle. Now I'm going to push my cycle start push button. If I had made this a vertical bit, you would have been able to see the names by it, but I'm simply going to press I02. And you can see the timer start to run, and the timer is done. And you had to hold down that cycle start push button the entire time, but once you've done that, you're now in AutoCycle mode. Now in order for me to stop the cycle, I need a cycle stop permissive. So let's say I have a pick and place and it's in the middle of processing. I'm going to press my cycle stop push button here, which is I03, and I have a request at this point. Even if I let go of the push button, I've made my request, but I have not unlatched my AutoCycle yet because perhaps my pick and place or other mechanism is still cycling. So when it gets done cycling, then I can turn on my cycle stop permissive and you can see that I have unlatched my AutoCycle. So that's the general idea behind this cycle start and cycle stop logic. I mentioned before that when you're doing cycle start, that sometimes you would want to blink a light or pulse a horn, something like that. So we're going to go ahead and make a blinking light, pulsing horn circuit here using some timers. And I'm going to go ahead and put them right down here at the end of this routine. I've already kind of pre-done some symbols, so this should go pretty quick. The way to do this is to use the normally closed of one timer, and we'll use T2 for that, and drive another timer with it. Go here to timers, grab an on delay timer, and this would be T1, and I've named this pulse on timer. And we'll make it 500 milliseconds long, about a half a second. And the other timer is driven by T1. And it is T2. And we'll make it a slightly different time here and see if we can notice it. That is pretty much the circuit for a blinking light. We'll save it, download it, and monitor it. And as you can see here, this is blinking on and off. Now the only actual contact you can use is this T1. This T2 is only going on for one scan, so you really can't see it pulse. So the one that you want to use is the pulse on timer, and you can use this timer to blink lights or sound horns or whatever. So where we would want to use this pulse is in series with our horn. And we're not going to leave all this logic here, but I'm going to show you exactly where we would use it. So here, while we are cycle starting, we would want some kind of a bit saying that we're trying to go into AutoCycle, and that's when we would want to pulse a horn. So I'm going to go ahead and add a bit, and we can just name it whatever. And all this is going to be is when we're in auto mode, we are pressing the cycle start button, we have a permissive, but we're not yet in auto cycle. That's when we would want to pulse the horn. So I'm going to use the normally closed of the auto cycle. And we just want to use one of these nice unused bits. Nice thing about the vertical bits is I can kind of see what has not been used. M2.7 looks like it's kind of our next available uncommented address. And we'll call this cycle start request. We're not yet in AutoCycle. The permissive's okay. And this is what we're going to use to pulse our horn. And in this case, the symbol is pretty much enough to tell what it does. And we'll be moving some of this logic a little bit later. But as you can see here, if I have a cycle start request, I would want to pulse my horn. And you can see up here the address for the horn. Could have just typed in horn here also. And this is where we would use our pulse on timer. So we're going back to testing here. We're going to do a cycle start request, and while we are doing our cycle start request, this pulse should blink this horn. So right now it is not blinking, and you can see it is blinking, and then the horn stops pulsing. So we can do the same thing for blinking lights. Let's go ahead and do some light programming at this point also. We're going to add a little bit of logic for our green, yellow, and red lights. This is a common thing that I usually would do if we are in auto mode but not AutoCycle. Then I would blink a light. So we're going to use this same pulse. And we would pulse the green light, which the name is stack green. So if I start typing stack green, there it is. Now if I'm in auto mode, but I am in AutoCycle, then I do not want to pulse. I just want to leave the light on full time. So this is the way the branches work. I can connect this branch to anything I want to just by holding it onto it with the left mouse button pressed. There is my green stack light. I usually like my yellow stack light to simply be on in manual mode. Very simple logic. Stack yellow. And I usually use my red light for faults. So we'll put some logic in there for that. We created a fault bit before. There it is. And we'll light our red stack light. We will save this, download it, and do a little monitoring here. So at this point I am in AutoCycle and my stack light is on full time. If I press cycle stop and I have a cycle stop permissive, my stack light starts to blink. So I'm in auto mode, but I am not in AutoCycle. So I'm kind of waiting to go into AutoCycle. If I go into manual mode, using the manual push button, my yellow stack light is on, my green stack light is off, and if for some reason I have a fault, I get a red stack light. So a lot of this logic, things like these outputs, would be in a separate outputs routine. We will move those maybe a little bit later and start another routine. It's a good placeholder for the output routine, which would be another FC. And that concludes this video, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Thanks.